Hello, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. For those joining us from Hawaii and Alaska, happy Halloween, everyone. Thank you so much for spending your valuable time with us at the STAR Center for our very first week of our Retention Academy focused on planning and strategies for behavioral health. My name is Allison Abe-Sekura. I'm the Vice President of Training and Programs here at ECU. Here's a little cartoon version of what I look like on most days. Today I have my cat ears on for the holiday, but I hope you're looking forward to celebrations later today. A national candy holiday is always a good idea. We're always excited about things going on around the nation here at ACU. You got here, so you must know a little bit about us, but I can tell you ACU is a national nonprofit really focused on the recruitment and retention of clinicians into underserved areas as the main way to solve the access to care issue. So we do lots of things like National Health Service Corps policy and advocacy. We make resources and training focused on clinician and clinical topics for those in underserved areas. We offer networking opportunities, and we also do a lot of stuff on clinician recruitment and retention for underserved facilities. We are one of two what they call national cooperative agreements that the Bureau of Primary Healthcare awards every few years. There's actually a network of 20 of us that receive funding from the Bureau to help develop resources and training and other support for you at health centers on a variety of topics. Community Health Center, Inc. is the other workforce NCA. They focus on pipeline development and team-based care. And then, of course, ACU focuses on recruitment and retention. You'll sense the theme as we go through this. So we have tons of resources, learning opportunities, and individual assistance focused on what you guys can do at health centers to better recruit and retain all types of clinical staff. So that's our STAR Center project, and that's how you're receiving this training. It's paid for by the Bureau through that National Cooperative Agreement. We're so thankful for them. And if you want to get a sense of other National Cooperative Agreement resources, you can visit our website, but also healthcenterinfo.org is the new clearinghouse workforce for all page for all of the NCAs. And so would love your continued engagement in the resource center on our website at chcworkforce.org or on that healthcenterinfo.org. I am not a one-woman show, and in fact, I'm not even a one-woman show today or through this series. We have a number of faculty that are all on the line right now and are going to be available and responsive during this session, during future sessions, and in between as we work through this learning experience. You can reach out to us anytime. These slides that include our contact information are in your right-hand go-to navigation pane in the handout section. So you can download those and, again, get in touch with us anytime. A couple of other housekeeping things aside from the handout. We are recording today, so just be aware of that before you share any questions that will be read aloud. We do hope you'll have lots of questions and want to engage with us. We have some opportunities here via the chat box and the question box. We're going to have some discussion board opportunities, and of course, we're available anytime. But it's nice for you to be able to ask questions kind of in a live way as we actually go through the material to get a sense of where you might want some further focus. And of course, we want you to have fun. I hope you'll notice from the last few minutes that I like to keep it quick. I like to keep it peppy. I like to make sure that you are not checking email the entire time that we're chatting. So please stay with me. If you have questions on the technical side and you say, I do want to look at the screen, Allison, I just don't know how, you can just get in touch with Mariah. She's the one here that keeps everything moving appropriately. Her email is here. You can use the chat boxes, those question boxes, and please just stay with us. It's going to be a fun ride. And I really want to get to it. You know, one of my pet peeves in some of these long series is when you spend too much time that first session talking about kind of what you're doing and how it's supposed to be going. So we'll spend just a little bit of time on that, but we want to cover a lot specifically on data and how to kind of punch up your retention plans as we go along. This entire series is really covering both planning for retention as well as specific strategies. ACU and our faculty that I showed you already are going to cover things like how to, make a retention plan, components of it, some 201 level stuff for you guys. We're hoping a lot of you already have retention plans. And then we're going to have some guest presenters later in the series that are going to talk about very specific strategies, especially related to behavioral health staff that you can put into play at your organization. And I mentioned behavioral health staff. Of course, the question is always, what is that? There are many, many different types of behavioral health professionals. I put just a few of them on the screen now. You can see it goes the range from psychologists, psychiatrists, through things like substance abuse counselors and licensed clinical social workers. For the purpose of this learning experience, we're really going to focus on behavioral health staff as anyone who's providing medical care for mental and behavioral health issues specifically, so things like people who work with and manage medication, as well as anyone who's providing therapeutic services for mental and behavioral health issues. So hopefully focusing on that, what people do will help us get a little away from the titles. LCSWs, for example, some do a lot of case management and wouldn't necessarily, for our purposes, count as behavioral health staff, and some LCSWs do a lot of counseling and therapy. So it's really about what they're focusing on, and we want to focus on those people who have expertise on mental and behavioral health challenges. While we're having all that conversation, we're going to do it a couple different ways over our time together with you the next several weeks. Webinars, as you can see, are sort of the base of it. We're going to be covering a lot of materials in these and going through specific issues, and then you're going to have a discussion board, which I know several of you have logged onto already. Thank you very much. But we're going to give you some questions at the end of this presentation that we would like you to respond to online. The goals of this series overall, I'll give them to you pretty broadly today, but it's really to take your retention plans to the next level. Again, if you have one and you're ready to really see how you can punch it up and make it more tied into what you're doing at an org level, this is great. We also want to help you, again, focus on some of those specific strategies, so ideas for things that you can try out at your own organizations, and of course, connecting you with others. That peer connection and peer learning is a really important part of it. We know you're busy, and sometimes it can feel a little, alien to communicate online fully, but we hope that you'll take the chance to connect on the discussion board and think of each other as experts and peer learners through this specific learning experience and then maybe beyond. Our goals for today specifically are on retention planning. What is it? How are we? Where are you guys right now? And then we're going to spend a lot of time identifying specific organizational, HR, and partner data and how that needs to factor into your retention plans. And then we're also going to focus on exploring ongoing tracking and realignment for those processes that make up your plan. So I hope you are ready. Strap in, buckle up. There will be polls, so we know if you're paying attention or not. Please participate. And we're going to dive in exactly to retention planning. What do I mean by that? The plan word can get really stressful for some folks. We say a plan by any other name. It can be whatever word works for you. Sometimes when people hear the word plan, they think, oh, this is one big thing that I have to, print out and put in a binder, and I'll be in trouble when HRSA comes and does a site visit, sees I'm not doing exactly what's supposed to happen. That is not the idea at all. For us, a plan is really a structure to help you understand what you're doing, to track it, to make sure that it's part of the lifeblood of your organization and your everyday processes. We think a right kind of plan and structure is going to help you track successes, identify failures, help you use data to do some innovative practices, and then, of course, always assuring your alignment with the goal. There's a billion things that you can do all the time, and so the issue is really which things have the most impact. I am a recovering English major, and so language is also really important to me. And I want to just stop for a moment and say that we really differentiate between plan and strategy. So for today's discussion and ongoing, we really define a strategy as a specific process with identified metrics. And then a plan is a structure that links those multiple strategies together. So they can be kind of thrown around, but we want to be really clear that we're talking about having a big organizational plan that's made up of many strategies that theoretically you're tracking, you're improving, and you're helping link them all together to get towards your goal. Some trademarks of a formal retention plan we wanted to really highlight are that it should be written down. I know many, many experts at health centers who have been doing this a long time, and when I say, where's your plan, they say, oh, Allison, it's all up here. They tap their noggin, and in the time of Powerball, I'd like to say, where's your lottery book? If you win that $1.6 billion in the lottery, where is any of this captured so that your organization can keep doing the work that they need to do without missing a beat as you hop on your new yacht and cruise around the world. So we really want it to be written down. We really want it to be regularly evaluated and part of kind of a living, breathing document that sticks with you and that you take some time looking at. And we'd also really like it to be connected to larger organizational benchmarks. So knowing how the plan itself supports what your organization is doing in terms of its larger strategy. That's what a formal retention plan is. We'd love to hear from you now. Mariah is going to launch a poll for us. Tell us where you are in this process. Do you have a formal retention plan? You can say, A, I'm not sure. B, nothing written down or regularly evaluated, though I have some concepts, in my head. C is a yes, but it's kind of basic. And D is a yes, and we're basically experts. So fill out that poll and let me know what you think about where your organization is. And we're going to kind of weave some of that throughout the conversation today, but then also that's going to inform us as we go along. So we're going to have Mariah share the poll results. Thank you, Mariah. And if you could read those aloud, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Sure. So we had 8% report, I'm not sure. 58% of folks said nothing written down or regularly evaluated, and 33% of people who responded said yes, it's pretty basic.
Okay,
no
fabulous.
Experts on the line.
All right. Well, you'll be experts. Don't you worry. Thank you all for sharing where you're at. That's really helpful for me and interesting to see how things break down, and great to see a lot of you have that are in the, it's basic, or we have something, it's just not written down yet. This is going to be a great opportunity for you to go through and capture what you're doing. And since I've got a lot of you at kind of the basic stage and you're ready to take it there, we want to, of course, spend this time talking about data for both your retention plan, again, that larger framework, as well as the specific processes that make up your plan. My favorite quote probably of all time, something I always put in my data slides, is with this one: without data, you're just another person with an opinion, because I just think it's so true, especially in today's times, lots of different conversation, lots of different ideas, and as everyone tends to focus on one idea, sometimes it's difficult to tell within your organization or within your leadership team whether or not one idea is better than another, or the one that you should try next, or how you're going to organize all of that. We think that data can give you a lot of answers to, these three big questions. What's happening at our organization that's making it difficult to retain staff? Where are there very specific and particular pressure points? And how do we break big challenges down into manageable pieces? That last question is sort of the biggest question. I've been doing health center workforce issues for almost a decade now, and I have to tell you the big problems are not getting smaller, and really it's only through breaking it down and breaking it down and breaking it down into little actionable pieces have we ever seen health centers do some big things to solve some of their challenges. And so the point of all of this data is to figure out kind of what you can actually do. And it's not just data itself on its own, of course, it's context. Data is actually just one small piece of that pie. So as we're going, remember that you guys are already the experts on your own organization's context. We hope that you have already or can add some of this data, but it's really the merging of those two things that's going to help you break down to some concrete issues and solutions as you go. There's a lot of different types of recruitment and retention data that we work with and other health centers work with. We're going to talk about all three of these today. Organizational data, HR data, and partner surveys, we think are kind of the three big buckets of stuff that if you put it all together, you have about as complete a picture as you can for where you need to go and what's going to happen. And so we're going to start with organizational data. It's maybe not the most fun or sexiest of all the different kinds of data, but it's definitely at the core of a lot of these issues. And it's really all about different sets of data that tell you what your organization is doing. So that's kind of, across all of your sites if you have more than one site, but really what's it like to practice there? What are some big issues that you're facing? So we'll start with the big one. Of course, this is the one everybody always wants to talk about, which is competitive salary. Sometimes it can feel difficult to figure out how you're going to kind of get that number, but we really think that you should have a good sense of a couple of data points related to your salary. One, what's your basic salary compared to local market, and of course, the value of your total benefits package compared to the local market. So if you have one or both of those things, we think you can start to address the overall concern about whether or not you have a major inability to retain many different types of your behavioral health staff. So as you know, lots of different behavioral health staff gets funded and paid for and reimbursed by many different mechanisms. There's also different expectations about what each type of behavioral health staff will be paid. And so if you see, our salary and our total benefits package for a psychologist versus a licensed professional counselor is either competitive or not, that's going to help you figure out where you need to focus some of your energy. And so we think you can look at those couple of data points, kind of address that underlying concern. If you do think it's a problem, that's when you would start to focus on strategies. And again, that's kind of those processes that make up your plan to say, okay, what's an improved compensation strategy? Where could we go? How could we come up with the money? And then how are we going to communicate the value of our existing benefits to begin with so that we know what's going on and people feel like, okay, they at least understand what they have already. That's one big area of data. Another big thing is National Health Service Corps utilization. So I mentioned earlier that we are National Health Service Corps people. ACU is funded by NHSC alumni, so we definitely wanted to focus some time on this. We think you should have a good sense of what percentage of National Health Service Corps clinicians you have by discipline and by site. Obviously, National Health Service can be either you're eligible for it or you're not, given your health professional shortage area score. But if you are, and if you are using it a lot, then we think there are potential there for a couple of concerns. One is, of course, high turnover in general. We find that health centers historically have not done the best of all facility types in retaining their National Health Service Corps professionals. And so getting a good sense of what percentage of your National Health Service Corps folks are there and whether or not they have the potential for turnover regularly. There's also, depending on your score, kind of a danger of having too many quote-unquote new professionals. So especially on the behavioral health side, it can be difficult for new folks out of training who are not necessarily trained in community health and not necessarily trained in your specific model of, let's say, integrated behavioral health care. And so those folks can more easily burn out or cause problems or have higher turnover. So you want to get a good sense of who those National Health Service Corps folks are. If you do have a problem there, we suggest some strategies focused on just larger engagement, but specifically engagement of those people who had at least at some point a strong commitment to service for the underserved. And then also a plan for support and ongoing training, especially if you're going to recruit, for example, National Health Service Corps scholars as you go along. We have next staffing structures. What is that, Allison? You may be asking. For us, it's the ratio of full-time to part-time staff by discipline. So obviously having flexible scheduling, part-time options, some of those pieces can be great. We're not saying it's not. We want you to consider that as part of your overall staffing approach. But we also want you to have an ongoing sense of what that actual ratio is, because we're concerned if a lot of health centers recently have moved to having a lot more part-time staff, which again, totally fine, but we want to make sure that you're doing it on purpose. So our concern with that data point is really just tracking, do you have a cohesive plan, or are you doing that to keep people who say they're going to leave otherwise, or because you can't hire a full-time person? So there might be kind of an underlying both recruitment and retention issue there. So the strategy there is really to focus on kind of where it is working. Maybe it's working great, and if you actually look at some of the HR data we're going to get to, no problem. But the other piece is then saying, okay, how do we be strategic about this and fold it into an attractive package to keep all of those people we've done a hard work of recruiting. So getting a sense of that important, along with, of course, the ever-present villain of productivity expectations. So I have to mention this one because it comes up so often when we talk to clinicians, but of course we want you to have a good sense of what your visits per FTE are by discipline. Really break this out for your behavioral health staff. It can be really different depending on your team makeup and the role in their team, more so than any other type of clinician or staffer. We're very concerned about burnout related to those productivity expectations, and also big picture questions with behavioral health overall, which are things like the disconnect between medical and mental health culture. So we've heard a lot of behavioral health staffers who are transitioning from, let's say, community mental health centers, who are experienced clinicians, they know what they're doing, but the expectations around how long they're allowed to speak with their patients, how it's part of a larger, busier day, how many patients they're supposed to see, that can be a real culture shock for them. And understanding what your expectations are and how it might be a challenge for them, and really help you identify where there might be some weak points for retention for those folks. We think strategies, if you feel this is an issue, can really focus around your CMO and your CFO getting together, making some kind of ongoing plan for adjusting and readjusting productivity as you can, and depending perhaps on your staffers' roles. And then obviously this is also an opportunity for conversations with your providers and your teams of folks to, again, say what's working, what's not working, where are we feeling the most pinch, and how could that pinch actually be hurting your ability to retain these folks. For behavioral health, we also want you to consider some big picture things that may not necessarily have a specific data metric, but we think should be part of an overall look at your organizational input, if not data, which is one, asking yourself, does your org really have an integrated care model? ACU's done some work over the last year doing some training with HR folks on, specific recruitment considerations of behavioral health staff in an integrated care model. And we found along the way that a lot of folks that do some of the recruiting or help with some of this work to retain don't necessarily have a good sense of where their organization is with integrated care and where it plans to go. So getting a good sense of, what the model of care actually is, what types of folks would really thrive in that model, and how perhaps the current staffing does not meet that ideal, can help you get a good sense of where you might need to focus your energies to make sure that the people that you have are really going to thrive if they stay. The other big question associated with that is, how do your behavioral health staff fit into teams? So are they the only behavioral health staff person at that site, and so they don't take part, let's say, in all 6 huddles for all the teams at that site and they're called in just regularly as necessary, or are they part of a standard pod that goes around and stays together all day with the same set of patients? These are the kinds of practice things you have to have a good understanding of to see how competitive you are and how your specific practice environment may be helping or hurting your ability to keep those behavioral health providers. And the other things are, what are some other practice expectations specific to behavioral health staff? There's a lot of this kind of stuff that doesn't necessarily come up with all other types of clinicians or staffers. So things like playing a dual role. So a lot of times if you're in a rural area, for example, the behavioral health person on your health center staff is the only behavioral health person for anyone miles around. So if you want to ensure that your own staff has access to behavioral health and your behavioral health staff is the only person there, oftentimes those people can be put in the very tricky role of providing mental behavioral health care to their colleagues. And that can create all sorts of challenges for the person and for the team. And so thinking about the very specific practice expectations, again, and how they could or could not play into your organization's ability to keep these people. We do want to highlight one resource here. It's a lot of org data I've covered. Thankfully, thank goodness, we've organized a lot of this for you all already as part of our overall STAR Center work with the Bureau of Primary Health Care. Every year we organize a one-page back and front, one-page data profile that's all sets of this organizational data for your specific organization. So you do not have to opt into those. We use things like uniform data system info and nationally available data sets, and the work is already done for you. So we have 3 years of those data profiles already available. They are available for free. We're able to send them just at any time to your organization and contain a lot of this stuff. So if you're sitting there thinking to yourself, oh, I don't have a lot of that org data that she just talked about, and it feels like a huge drama to get it organized, don't worry, we're here for you. We've got your back. And you can click on that link there from the handouts or visit our website, and it's at the bottom right of the resources page. Visit that info center, get the scoop, and we're available anytime to talk through that. And hopefully that helps you with some of that org data that we covered and gives you a good sense of, okay, here's how I can work with what I have already without having to do a lot more work. Okay, so that's the good news. I always love delivering good news. And I'm hoping the next section will also be good news because that's human resources data. Hooray! This is the kind of stuff that you guys probably already have. Again, if you don't have it, don't be stressed. But we wanted to highlight a few specific HR data points we think that you should definitely be tracking in general, but also be tracking as part of your overall retention planning efforts. Turnover, of course, is the big one. Everyone talks about turnover all the time, and this is really about thinking about the number of people who leave in a year by discipline. It doesn't have to be a year. We suggest a year. We think that keeping track of that data point, one, is going to help you look at long-term trends, but two, help you figure out kind of key disciplines to target. So maybe a certain type of your behavioral health staff is turning over. You know, you don't want to lump all of those folks together. It will also help you identify any specifically high rates on teams, specific teams, or at specific sites. So we hear that probably the most, which is that our turnover rate for this specific site is really high because of XYZ reason. Sometimes there's a lot you can do about it, sometimes not, but the important thing is you know where your problem points are. So again, you can link together some of those strategies for understanding that highest turnover and then coming up with a plan to address, you know, a given issue. And we say a year is probably a good time frame when you have so many other things going to basically say, yep, this is what we want to do about that. Tenure is the next one, and that's kind of the second side of the same coin, but that's really looking at the length of employment for each individual by discipline. Sometimes averages are really tricky here because if you have somebody who's been there a long time, they can really kind of shade the results in the information. So just think about how you want to capture it in terms of averages versus other things. But we think that understanding that instead of turnover helps you figure out problems, understanding tenure really helps you understand successes. And so figuring out who stayed the longest and then spending time figuring out why and what's working for them and why they are going to hopefully continue to stay is going to help you identify how you can sort of test out successful strategies across multiple disciplines. And it may be that certain disciplines, even within behavioral health themselves, lend themselves to really appreciating that flex time or whatever the case may be with your practice expectations. But it's great to figure out some strategies that you want to test out. Another big piece, especially for certain types of behavioral health staff, is looking at absence trends. This is something, again, probably you all track for certain types of folks, if not everyone, but you want to look at the absence rate per individual and per team to figure out how you can identify disengaged staff or teams. This is, again, kind of the place where you want to see, are there any individuals that we think might be thinking of leaving? Are there any teams where it seems like everybody's kind of calling out, they're not interested in showing up to work, that we want to give some extra attention to right now? Are there whole sites of people where, for whatever reason, people are turning over at a higher rate there, or and you can sense that by their absence rates? So starting to get a sense of where those problem pieces might be, and of course the hope is that you can stop them before they leave. And that's really what those strategies would be about, that you would put into that plan that you're making, is saying, oh, our absence trends are showing that we've got a problem with these 2 sites, so let's come up with a strategy that we're going to test out to connect with those folks before they leave and hopefully identify and address any underlying issues there. The last big one we want to hit is staffing revenues and expenses. And that's looking at a number of things connecting your retention with your bottom line at your organization. We want you to have a good sense of how much it costs to recruit each type of person that you're talking about. So maybe it takes you a lot longer to recruit a psychologist than it takes for you to recruit a licensed professional counselor. And maybe that should play into who you're going to recruit or not. We also want you to understand the revenue per employee. And so that's, again, usually providers and people who can bill, but how much you're making for each person. And so the point of all of that is to really help you understand how much a vacancy costs and really, of course, the impact of turnover on the bottom line. So if you can say, well, hey, it costs us X amount of money every time an LCSW leaves this organization because a vacancy every day costs this much, and because it costs us this much to recruit somebody and it takes this much time, you can start to really associate some dollar figures with retention and with stopping turnover. So this is how much it saves us every year by keeping this percentage of people. As much as you can come up with hard numbers and dollars for your specific organization, the better, and that gets everybody on your leadership team understanding how to invest or not invest, or kind of what your alternatives are for trying out some of these retention strategies that you want to really try out as part of your larger plan. I'm happy to say ACU does have a tool on this. We'll have Mariah drop it in the chat box there. It's a financial impact calculator. It's a spreadsheet that you download. We don't get any of the info. You keep it for yourself. You can mess with it as you like and put in all of your own individual numbers. It is kind of a large number, but it was going to give you hard dollars for your specific organization for the staffing revenues and expenses bucket of info. So please check that out and fill it out. We think that that's probably one of the biggest HR data points that you can have when you're trying to make decisions about how to invest in strategies, current staff, etc. For behavioral health, we want you to consider also things like isolation, whether or not your behavioral health staff are isolated. That can be a big kind of HR piece related to retention, whether or not they're the only behavioral health staff of their type or at all at their specific site. which of course then is tied to tracking burnout. We have whole other series and tools related to that, but figuring out how you're keeping track of burnout and how you're identifying the impact of that on your overall retention, big important piece of things. And of course, also identifying the financial impact of behavioral health vacancies to overall objectives and future opportunities. So thinking about, okay, if we have a lot of vacancies or if we have a lot of problems in this specific issue, how are we losing out on dollars right now or future dollars? We do have a new tool coming out in the spring focused on helping you capture your turnover data. A lot of the HR data points I've mentioned so far, hopefully you have already and you're tracking, including your turnover, but we want to try and introduce some level of standardization so you can get a sense of what your peers are doing. So keep an eye out for that, but in the meantime, please make sure you check out that financial impact tool as we go along and figure out what you need. Phew, okay, are you tired yet? I know this is a lot to take in. You guys are doing great because we're just to this last section on types of data, which I know is thrilling, but this is a little more of the abstract fun stuff, which is partner data. Figuring out what you need to incorporate into your plans based on what other folks around you are doing. It would be lovely if we lived in a vacuum and everything that we did had an impact only on itself and we didn't have to worry about other people. But alas, it is not that time. And so we need to keep track of a few things. We want to just highlight 3 of those for you. One is competitor plans. So what is going on with folks and communities around you? Do they have plans of their own to expand or to change their scope or to do any other of those types of things that could result in increased competition for staff? We see a lot of people having trouble, especially with behavioral health staff, turning over to new people who are focused on adding behavioral services to their own organizations. So you want to identify what weak points there are out there. And you want to identify how you can focus on staff engagement through the time that there might be people calling you, your staff, saying, hey, I see you're an expert at this, come work for us. Funder plans are, of course, huge things. I'm sure you track this. We want to make sure that this type of information is part, though, of your overall workforce and retention strategy. So, dates and amounts of potential funding opportunities are partners. I know you guys do that already as part of your overall leadership stuff, but how is it part of your retention plan? How is it part of your workforce plan? That needs to kind of be there so that you can maximize opportunities to invest in staff. I got to tell you, burnout is hot right now. A lot of people giving money to burnout initiatives and wanting to focus on that issue related to retention. And so, great. I know that you all are busy, but as much as you can have a few proposals that are at least crafted, structured, one-page outlines that can be quickly readied if opportunities arise, great way to get additional funding for some of the strategies you want to try out. And of course, the last thing, our friends, our community partners, what are the big local, state, or regional initiatives or issues that are going on around you that you need to consider as you go through things? Anytime you can leverage resources you have with potential partners for funding or other types of opportunities is a great thing. And also regular conversation with your partners should be part of all the strategies that you're implementing, but you can do some set focus depending on what you're doing, depending on your state, depending on your region. And so you want to think through all of those things. Overall, for behavioral health staff, again, we want you to consider some other things. There may be big pieces for behavioral health that are more of an impact than any other type of clinicians or staff. Things like state regulatory issues you may need to consider or address. I've mentioned LCSWs already. Depending on your state, there will be different requirements for newly trained master's level social workers to have a certain number of hours, 2,000, 3,000, some amount of hours of supervised on-site sort of training and care, clinical hours. So if that's the case, and you don't have anyone to supervise that person, how are you going to get an LCSW that's newly out of school? And if somebody trains somewhere else, how are you going to get them from there? And how are you going to focus on retaining those folks who train with you so that they don't just leave once they've gotten their 3,000 hours? So there may be a lot that you want to do with your partners kind of at a state level to address some, regulatory or other issues depending on the staff type that you're working with. Also great to have a good sense of the larger national training trends for behavioral health professional types. Are there more psychiatric nurse practitioners being trained than psychologists? Are there more LCSWs social workers being trained than licensed professional counselors? It's good to know in general what's going on nationally and also at your state and in your local communities, residencies, health professions training schools. So getting a good sense and getting that input into your retention plan also really key moving forward. One resource alert we wanted to highlight for you is our partner Community Health Center, Inc., which I mentioned earlier in the webinar. They have a program to help you set up your own postdoc psychology residency program. It's a very exciting learning opportunity. They're taking applications now. You can get there through this link or just by Googling it. But you want to think about how training those health professionals is part of one of those strategies you want to put in your plan. So it's a lot of stuff. I mean, we've been talking, and we've only covered very high level, a handful of the larger universe of things. But I want to keep us focused on this goal today and moving forward, which are, what are some specific measurable issues you're going to try to address with your plan? And how are your strategies collectively leading to progress on those issues? And so there's a lot of things that you can do. We'd love to hear from you now. Also, just to make sure you're awake since we're at the post-lunch hour, Mariah is going to launch our next poll, which is asking, after hearing all of this, what type of data would you most like to add to your organizational planning moving forward? If you could close your eyes and pick one, would it be organizational data? And that's all the high level, more processy type of stuff we talked about. Is that HR data? And that's some of the stuff on turnover, tenure, absences that you guys are maybe more used to collecting and looking at? Is it some of that partner data that's figuring out what's going on in the world around you? Are you feeling right now at this moment, I need it all. I need to have it all. Tell us what you think there. And when Mariah's ready, she'll close the poll and read out the results.
All right. So the big takeaway here, we had 73% of folks say they need it all, with a fairly even split for organizational data, HR data, and partner data, all at 9%.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you, Mariah. Thank you all for participating in that. I hope you'll stick with us, honestly, through this year. This learning experience is just one thing. We're going to have lots of other data opportunities. There's resources we have that's already available for you. There's resources other people have. Really, but as we're going through this whole learning collaborative, we want you to think about, okay, what's our data point for this? How are we doing it? And so that really takes us to the question of how is data related to your retention processes. So a lot of what we talked about, all those big data points have a lot to do with, okay, what overall data do we have about whether or not our plan is working? But we also want you to think about how are you taking a data-informed approach to your processes themselves. And so that's really where those PDF say cycles come in. I am sure you are all familiar, at least with the acronym. It's the Plan, Do, Study, Act acronym that's almost always associated with clinical activities. We put a link in the slides here to your template. It's a great template. It's a 2-pager that basically walks you through the whole process, and some of our questions come from that. But the real basic idea is that you don't just want to do everything and hope that it works out, right? We don't have enough time or money for that kind of thing. Issues are too big, problems are too real, time is too limited. So the idea is basically that you make a plan for a process, you do the thing, you study it to see how it went, and then you act to improve it or change it or whatever, right? And so we want to make sure that you have a PDSA cycle for all of these processes that you're putting into that plan that you're either building or you're updating with us through this learning collaborative. For retention process itself, there's these handful of questions that we think kind of lead you through that. And I'm going to give you an example, but you know, the first question is always, what are we testing? What are we trying to do? What do we predict will happen and why? What do we think is going to happen? What's the big impact we're going for? Who's going to be involved in managing that process or making that process happen? What's our timeline for this process? What resources will this require? What data needs to be collected along the way to assess it later? And then you do all that stuff. That's all the planning part. Then you do it. And then come these next questions, which are what happened? Okay, did it work as planned? And then how does it compare to the predictions that we made? And then the last act part is, where do we go from here? So it can seem kind of basic. It can also seem kind of abstract as you go along. So we wanted to walk you through a quick example, which is understanding stay interviews. So I'm sure many of you are familiar. Just in case you aren't, I'll tell you stay interviews are one strategy you can put in your retention plan that help you engage with folks before the exit interview. So you know, exit interviews, you interview people on their way out to find out, oh, why are you leaving? Stay interviews are about interviewing them while they're still there to stop them from leaving. They're great. They're fabulous. They're basically an easy concept, basically an easy lift. And so we recommend them to a lot of people, but we don't want people to just do everything willy-nilly. We want them to have kind of this PDSA approach to doing something like stay interviews. So in this sample scenario, what we say we're testing are stay interviews. We're putting them in our retention plan, and we want to test out in a small way this thing, and starting small is an important part of that. So what do we predict will happen and why? So we think that stay interviews will help us, Sample Health Center, find more actionable issues to make people happier. We also think they're going to increase engagement because people feel valued and listened to. Who's going to be involved? We think the CEO, the CMO, and all the managers. So in this sample 2 example, we might want to think, oh, we're going to test it out on one site. So at this one site, we're going to involve leadership overall and all the managers at this one site. And we're going to take kind of a year. A year is actually a long time, but why not? We're all busy. So we're going to take a year to test this out at this site and see if it improves anything there. What resources will this require? Actually, quite a lot once you start to think about. That's why we gave ourselves a year. We need some kind of interview template, how the actual interview is going to go. We need to train the managers on how to appropriately do this stay interview. We need time on everyone's schedule, both the managers and all the people that they're going to interview. We need some kind of mechanism for the managers to report anything they found out, kind of in a real-time way. And we also, at the leadership level, need a plan to address what we find there. So that's not even an exhaustive list, but it gives you a sense of, oh, we know going in that we need all of these things. We're going to ask ourselves that next question, which is what data needs to be collected. And so we think, you know, we need a short anonymous survey for the participants. How was that process? Or, you know, pre and post. How do you feel going into this? How do you feel coming out of it? We also think managers are going to need to be surveyed on whether or not they enjoyed the experience, how it went, that kind of thing. And of course, we always need that tracker for the issues that came up, what we did about it, what we heard, etc. And so let's say we did all of that, and in the end we stop though and we say, okay, what actually happened? In this example, which is more common than not, well, wow, we found more issues than we thought, but we did find a theme among all of those issues at that site. Compared to the predictions, people wanted faster change than we can actually give them. So they're feeling actually a little bit more increased frustration, but they are feeling more heard. So it's sort of a little column A, a little column B. So after all that analysis, it turns out this health center, they're going to go from they're going to make a plan to address that big theme, focus on communication, and then make plans to do this again the following year with more than just that site and their improved process. So you can see it's a very simple process. It's theoretically what you're all doing anyway when you're making a plan. The idea is that as with the retention plan to begin with, you write it all down. You say, this is what we think we're going to be doing. This is how we put some real pieces around it to see whether or not it works. Because you can't do all of the retention processes in your plan. You've got to figure out what's going to work for you and what's not. We think that taking this PDSA approach and then using ongoing retention data to address your overall strategies and your plan are going to help you get where you need. So we're at just the last 10 minutes, friends. I'm excited to say now's about the time you get to dive into the data discussion. A lot of that is going to happen, again, please put your questions out there right now, but a lot of that is going to happen online on our discussion board. So this happens, there's a little screenshot of the STAR Center website. You can log on through the platforms button at the top of the page. Once you're in, you select the retention planning and strategies group there. You click that orange button, and then there will be a list of all the weeks you want to select. Week 1, that's now, and you can comment and reply to other folks. You're going to have a few questions to respond to for this week. It's less dramatic than it looks, all the text all written here. One, we want you to say hi to your cohort, share your name, location, and kind of goal for this learning experience. 2, we want to know about data for you. What data do you currently use and kind of what's the secret of your success there? And then, of course, 3, because it's a pros and cons type of learning experience, what data do you wish you could focus on next, and what are your roadblocks there? So that's going to help us get a sense of who you are. That's going to help you get to know each other. Several of you are veterans of our discussion board, so if you have logged on before, it's the same username and password, but hopefully everyone at the conclusion of this webinar, just try and log on, make sure you can log on. If you don't feel like responding today, no problem. But I want to get a sense of where people are feeling right now as we have the opportunity for questions. Poll question number 3, final question. Are you completely and totally pumped to have this discussion on the data discussion board? A, yes, I've been waiting my whole life for this moment. B, I'm scared, but also excited. Or C, Allison, you're being a little extra, but I am ready to jump into it. My feelings won't be hurt. If you select C, you would not be the first person that's ever told me I'm being a little extra about it. But put in your final votes while you think of your final questions, and Mariah will read them out for us.
All right, closing the poll. All right, thanks everybody for chiming in there. We have a pretty even split between people who have been waiting for this moment their whole life, but are also a little scared, 43% for each of those, and 14% of folks who responded said that you're being a little extra.
Wow, 14%. That percentage is actually lower than I anticipated, so I can tell you're already a gentle audience. Thank you for that. Thank you for humoring me. These web-based things are kind of hard to get people involved, so we wanted to give you the opportunity there. To my team on the phone, do we have any questions that came in?
We don't have any questions just yet, but okay. You can chime in through the chat box there or the questions box. Both of those are located in the right-hand side of your GoToWebinar dashboard there.
Okay, great. And I did receive one kind of private chat question, which is if you had to pick one thing to start with, what would you start with? I would say focusing on your HR data to start with, and specifically focusing on both your turnover and your tenure data. I would say the #1 place to start if you don't have any of this, or you maybe have it and haven't organized it yet. One, that's the easiest thing for people to basically understand the concept for, so you're starting it. Two, it should be relatively easy for you to pull together. All of these things, of course, take time, but you have everybody's start dates and end dates and those kinds of things. And three, it's pretty easy to then start to tie an annualized turnover and tenure rate to specific strategies that you're trying out, so you can connect maybe, oh, our turnover rate really dipped a year after we tried that retention process that we started last year. So I'd say if you have to start anywhere, start with turnover and tenure. And again, we're available to help talk you through that process and how it works.
Allison, this is Ann, and I will just chime in on, I agree with you totally on the tenure and the turnover. And oftentimes your payroll system can actually get those numbers for you in just a few minutes. So it doesn't have to be a huge, robust system in order to do that. Oftentimes those are built-in reports. And then just make sure you sort that by your departments or however you want to sort that to figure out where you need to focus. So once you have the data, it really helps you decide where you need to focus. Now, it can be overwhelming because maybe it shows everywhere, but like Allison said, focus on something that you can impact.
Thanks, Anne. That was a magic phrase, built-in reports. Ah, the favorite words in the English language for an HR professional.
Yes, they are built in.
That's right. Okay, so going once, going twice on any questions. Mariah, anything we want to shout out before we let these fine people go for a Halloween day?
We don't have any questions coming in just yet, but just another plug, everybody jump on the discussion board while you've got some time this afternoon, and put any questions you have there, or you can contact us all via email.
Thank you very much for that, and you'll see I have it here next. Our next webinar is November 7th at 3. We will see you on the discussion board. Looking forward to the conversation and engagement there, and please be in touch with us anytime via email or phone if you want to talk through any of it. Thank you so much.